President Donald Trump, facing pressure to scale back a U.S.-China trade war contributing to a global economic slowdown, claimed today that serious talks will begin soon, although another round has been expected in Washington next month. Mr. Trump said his trade negotiators had received two very good calls from China yesterday. But a spokesman for China's foreign ministry said today that he didn't know what calls Mr. Trump was talking about. Mr. Trump expressed his optimism about China hours after he sent mixed messages on the tariff war. President Donald Trump, facing pressure to scale back a U.S.-China trade war contributing to a global economic slowdown, claimed today that serious talks will begin soon, although another round has been expected in Washington next month. He at first seemed to express regret yesterday over escalating the trade dispute, but the White House later said his only regret was that he didn't impose even higher tariffs on China. Today, Mr. Trump claimed last night's conversations meant China is serious about making a deal. He said later that talks also had taken place before Sunday, local time. "I think we're going to have a deal, because now we're dealing on proper terms. They understand and we understand," Mr. Trump told a news conference on Monday at the end of G7 summit in Biarritz, France. "I think they want to make a deal very badly. I think that was elevated last night." Rated articles. The vice chairman of China came out. He said he wants to see a deal made. Leaders of the Group of Seven nations said today they were preparing to help Brazil fight the fires burning across the Amazon rainforest and repair the damage, even as tens of thousands of soldiers were being deployed to fight the blazes that have caused global alarm. He declined to say whether he's spoken to President Xi Jinping or to identify those involved in the most recent conversations, saying only that they were at the highest levels. "This is the first time I've seen them where they really want to make a deal. And I think that's a very positive step," Mr. Trump added as he met with Egypt's president on the sidelines of the Group of Seven summit. Whenever he is asked about China, Mr. Trump almost always says he believes they want to make a deal more than he does. He said today that the two sides will begin talking very seriously, adding that after the calls he believes the Chinese mean business. "The Chinese were unaware of any recent conversations. We cannot let China pursue these unfair and unreciprocal trading practices," Mr. Kudlow said. "I have not heard of the weekend calls mentioned by the United States," said Gang Shuang, a spokesman for China's foreign ministry. A Chinese delegation long had been expected to travel to Washington in September to continue talks, and that remained the case after Mr. Trump's escalation Friday following China's tariff announcement. It was unclear if Mr. Trump was referring to the previously scheduled talks next month or something else. What Trump had to say about surprise visit of Iranian Foreign Minister Mr. Trump's comments about China came as he acknowledged, for the first time, yesterday's surprise appearance at the G7 summit by Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, and as the international gathering put Mr. Trump's differences with his counterparts on display. World leaders had encouraged Mr. Trump all weekend to de-escalate the conflict with China. U.S. President Donald Trump has acknowledged having second thoughts about escalating a trade war with China. He also clashed with French President Emmanuel Macron over France's new digital services tax, and he broke with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in not forcefully condemning North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches. But Mr. Trump today repeatedly claimed the reports of disagreements were overblown, starting with the Zarif visit. Uncharacteristically silent yesterday while Mr. Zarif was in Biarritz, where the summit is being held. Mr. Trump insisted that Mr. Macron had asked his approval before inviting Mr. Zarif to attend. Mr. Macron is working to lower tensions in the Persian Gulf. And Mr. Trump rejected the assertion by some allies that the invitation to Mr. Zarif was somehow an insult. "I spoke to President Macron yesterday and I knew everything he was doing and I approved whatever he was doing and I thought it was fine," Mr. Trump said of the Zarif talks. Mr. Trump today said in a series of tweets that he will respond in hours to an announcement Friday, local time, that China was retaliating to U.S. tariffs with a slate of its own protective measures. He said he thought it was too soon for he and Mr. Zarif to meet, but wouldn't say whether any Americans had been in contact with the Iranian. The Iranian government had said it would not meet with any Americans during the 8-hour visit to France. Mr. Trump said there could soon be time for a meeting between himself and Iranian officials, but refused to lay out clear steps forward or say if he'd be willing to accede to a plan put forward by Mr. Macron to offer Iran some relief from crushing petroleum sanctions in exchange for restarting nuclear talks. He said of the Iran talks, "It's all very new. They're under a lot of financial stress." Where the US-China trade talks currently stand after the China trade talks broke down this spring, Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi agreed in June to resume negotiations. Talks in Shanghai in July ended without any indication of progress, and the White House said at the time that Chinese negotiators would come to Washington in September. Mr. Trump last week hiked tariffs on China after China taxed some U.S. imports in retaliation for a previous round of imports levied by Mr. Trump. Trump also ordered U.S. corporations to find alternatives to doing business in China and threatened to declare a national emergency to enforce it. He softened the threat yesterday, saying he would only consider it if China again responded with raising tariffs on American goods. Copyright 9 Digital Pty Limited 2019. Let's block ads.